The event today is building upon work that ISD has been doing in this last decade. There are ministers from around the world here. They'll be looking at what they're doing within their own countries in order to make the case to further bring down fossil fuel subsidies. There's almost $600 billion a year the governments are spending on fossil fuel subsidies. Some governments are spending more on fossil fuel subsidies than they are on education, on public health, on infrastructure. But they're also a problem because of the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, which is the main driver we know of climate change.
The point with fossil fuel subsidies is that actually they distort the market because they price the oil products at a lower price than costs are. The other problem is that they encourage wasteful consumption because the prices are too low. And the third problem is that although it is meant to help the poor, only 8% of the money, and we are talking about 8% of around $500 billion a year, is going to those poor people. And the rest goes to the rich people that already have access to energy. So the point is, you have to phase them out. The other thing is, you have to do it now, because now oil prices are relatively low, so you can do it without a lot of problems.
If the prices of oil rise again, then I think governments will be tempted to reintroduce various forms of energy subsidization, that they'll be attempted to stray from fairly neutral, technically determined pricing or regulatory formula and introduce calculations or price-setting mechanisms which become more and more politically driven in an attempt to shield populations from what may be energy prices that rise again.
There's a number of actors, a number of players and partners in this work, and the Friends of the Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform comprises now 8 countries that have stepped up, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Ethiopia, Costa Rica, others. In Washington in April, they were joined by United States as well as France.
If you phase out fossil fuel subsidies, do it in a way that it doesn't harm people. For instance, if you are not communicating about why you are phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, if you are not seeing to it that you have your targeted approach to those people who are really in need of it, people don't understand. And you have to make very clear, what are you going to do with the money? Are you going to invest it in clean technology, in renewables? Are you going to invest it in better transport? Are you going to invest it in health or in education? Transparency is one of the most important issues. And you can do it when oil prices are relatively low.
How do we improve energy access? I mean, these are truly the energy poor. The people who don't even have the choice to pay for their energy because they just don't access modern energy. Maybe they're in rural areas or peri-urban areas and they simply don't have electricity connection. Or maybe they're one of the 2.5 billion people on the planet that is primarily dependent on biomass energy, wood, straw, and dung, for their daily cooking needs. They don't have access, for example, to LPG bottled gas for cooking, and they're suffering greatly in terms of health impacts. So one thing you can do with the revenue or the resources that are freed up is use it to subsidize access. Provide a program to switch people to cleaner cooking fuels and the associated hardware, stoves, gas bottles, or subsidize the connections, the extension of rural grids or even peri-urban connections for people who don't have electricity. To me, that's a much greater welfare enhancing way to use these public resources than on energy subsidies.
The momentum from this is looking, among the areas, is looking to Paris. And the Paris Climate COP is really absolutely critical in order for the world community to realize that we need to hold down the temperature increase from 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And everything has to be tried, and that's from looking at rolling out new technologies, looking at new cooperation for electricity grids, but also getting at some low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is just taking away these distortionary subsidies, which are actually, one, helping some big oil and other energy companies, but also directly contributing to greenhouse gas emissions.
It gets easier to go ask for money if the drain on the budget is reduced as energy prices are reformed and subsidies are reduced. So there's that trade-off. Do I want to spend whatever money I get out of government for the energy sector on subsidies or other more progressive, interesting, and ultimately productive things?